I decided it was time to say goodbye to the Lian Li TU150. This case is on the smaller side, but I'm not sure if it truly falls into the small form factor category. Still, it was the smallest PC I'd ever built before. Part of me wanted to go back to a larger chassis, reasons being they typically have better airflow and therefore improved thermals, expandability for storage, PCIe cards, bigger air coolers and radiators, and they're just easier to work with. But instead I decided to push the limits and go even smaller. I finally landed on the FormD T1. The T1 is really well packaged. I ordered the sandwich kit in black. They also offer their reference kit in the same form factor, where you don't have to use a riser cable for the GPU. Keep in mind, you're limited to a 2-slot GPU in the reference kit. Before diving into this build, it's vital to know your GPU slot size. The position of the top strut configures the T1 for different slot sizes, which also determines how much space is available for the CPU cooler. The Asus TUF3080 is a 2.7 slot size GPU, which leaves me only 58mm. The product page for the T1 lists the maximum cooler height for different configurations. The standoffs secured to the res bar here will also vary depending on the T1's configuration. It comes with several standoffs of different sizes for this and the motherboard, so you don't have to worry about providing your own. This case is designed and manufactured incredibly well. It's obviously not like a traditional chassis where it comes pre-built. You have to build it yourself, which to me is part of the appeal. Like other SFF builds, you really have to plan out your components before jumping in. Luckily, most of the components from my previous build were compatible with the T1. Here I'm installing the PSU bracket, which will house the trusty Corsair SF750. This is one of the most popular power supplies for small form factor builds. It's easily handled my 5800X and 3080 with no issues, although note that I am undervolting both of those components. The T1 offers an option to install one 2.5-inch SSD tucked here in between the front panel and the power supply. I didn't get to use my second 2.5-inch SSD for my previous build, but I can always upgrade the one I just installed. Another option for more storage is adding an SSD on the backside of the motherboard, where an extra PCIe 3 M.2 slot resides. I bought the PCIe 4 riser cable from FormD when I purchased the T1. I've never used a riser cable before, but because of the cable's rigidity, it was a bit strange curving it around the bottom edge of the motherboard. Moving on to the side struts, these not only provide additional strength to the overall chassis, but are also where the fan brackets are mounted to. I'll install the chassis fans later, but I'm using the Noctua NF12s from my previous build. Another popular option for the T1 are the Fantech T30s, which are 30mm in height, 5mm taller than their Noctua counterpart. Before installing the graphics card, I have to mount the GPU lock bar to the I/O shield. Once the TUF3080 slides right into place, the tiny lock bar is then secured to the Shift I/O bracket on the backside, where all of the system's I/O resides. To finish the GPU installation, 2 thin I/O cover pieces are screwed into place that fill in the gaps around the GPU I/O shield. Unfortunately, because I don't have low-profile RAM, I had to remove the plastic shroud covering the I/O and VRMs in order to install the ID Cooling IS55. Another, more expensive CPU cooler option is the Alpenfun Black Ridge, where you don't have to remove the shroud, although you can't use the heatsink for the M.2 SSD. I'm plugging power cables as I go, and doing my best to organize them. These are the stock cables from the Corsair SF750. While it's doable to make these cables fit, it's not ideal. If your budget allows, I'd recommend custom power cables. Next, I'm securing the Noctua NF12s into place. With the GPU already installed, there's just enough clearance for my screwdriver to slide in through the fan brackets. These are configured to pull air out and away from the system. I'm definitely interested to measure the cooling performance with how I've configured this machine. I'm most concerned about the low-profile CPU cooler, speaking of which, is finally time to install. One of the few parts I didn't get to port over for my previous build was the Noctua NH-U12S CPU cooler. Curious to see how well this ID Cooling IS55 will perform. All I have left to do is throw in the panels, and it was time to fire it up. And I gotta say, I'm thrilled with it. The T1 looks slick, and even though it's small, stands out on my desk. With only a volume of 9.95 liters, the combination of the 8-core 5800X and the 3080, this thing packs a punch. I'm not even a big RGB guy, but the lights diffusing through the aluminum panels looks pretty sick. Not long after setting it up, I noticed this. Coil whine from the 3080, not even under full load, was unbearable. I removed the GPU shroud, then the fans, lifted the sticker to access the bearing, and applied machine oil. Unfortunately, it didn't make a significant difference. As much as I enjoyed having it on my desk to show off, I ended up mounting it underneath. This basic mount holds the PC in place with 2 straps. The T1 is oriented horizontally, so the chassis fans exhaust towards the back of the desk. It was a little bit of a pain to install, but I'm happy with the solution. Overall, this is the most fun I've had building a PC. While the T1 is an expensive chassis at $265 plus shipping at the time of this video, because of its brilliant backpackable design, slick aesthetic, and seemingly endless versatility, it's worth it in my book. I couldn't recommend the T1 enough. Thanks for watching, y'all. I'll see you in the next video.